Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his forehead as he moved through the endless piles of metal junk. The orbital junkyard stretched out in all directions around him, full of broken ships, old machines, and pieces of technology from dozens of different worlds. He had been working here for 3 years now, searching through the trash for anything valuable enough to sell, the artificial gravity on station. Omega-7 made his boots stick to the metal floor as he walked. Above him, the stars shone through the clear dome that covered this section of the junkyard. It was beautiful, but Jake had stopped looking at the stars a long time ago. Now he only looked down, searching for his next meal ticket. Jake was 28 years old and had been on his own since he was 16. His parents had died in a mining accident on Europa, and he had been bouncing from job to job across the outer colonies ever since. Salvage work was not glamorous, but it paid enough too. Keep him fed and housed in a small room on the station. Today felt different, though. Jake could not explain it, but something was pulling him toward the far end of the junkyard, where the oldest and most dangerous wreckage was stored. The station manager had warned all the workers to stay away from that section, but Jake had never been good at following rules. He climbed over a pile of twisted metal that had once been part of a cargo ship. The metal was still warm from whatever had destroyed it. Jake had learned not to ask too many questions about where the junk came from. Sometimes it was better not to know. As he worked his way deeper into the restricted area, Jake noticed that the debris here was different from the usual broken civilian ships and mining equipment. The metal was darker and the shapes were more aggressive. These looked like pieces of military hardware, but not from any human military he recognized. Jake had been working in salvage long enough to know valuable when he saw it. Military tech always brought good money from the right buyers. He pulled out his handheld scanner and began checking for anything that might be worth his time. The scanner beeped softly as it detected something unusual buried under a pile of twisted metal plates. Jake began moving the debris carefully, not wanting to damage whatever was underneath. The work was hard, and soon he was breathing heavily in the recycled air of his environmental suit. When he finally cleared away the last piece of metal, Jake stopped and stared. Lying in front of him was a piece of armor unlike anything he had ever seen. It was a chest plate colored a deep black that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The surface was perfectly smooth, without a single scratch or dent despite being buried under tons of wreckage. Jake knelt down and ran his gloved fingers over the armor. It was cold to the touch, but there was something else, something that made his skin tingle even through his gloves. Along the edges of the chest plate he could see symbols carved into the metal. They were not human writing, but they were not like the alien text he had seen before either. As he examined the armor more closely, Jake noticed small marks along one edge. They looked like tally marks, the kind prisoners made on cell walls to count the days. But there were so many of them. Hundreds and hundreds of tiny scratches in the metal. Jake was so focused on the armor that he almost missed the sound of footsteps behind him. He turned around quickly, his heart pounding, but saw nothing except the endless piles of junk. The footsteps had sounded heavy, like someone wearing boots, but there was no one there. "Hello?" Jake called out, his voice echoing in the vast space. "Is someone there?" Only silence answered him. Jake shook his head and turned back to the armor. He must have imagined it. He had been working alone for so long that sometimes his mind played tricks on him. He reached down to pick up the chest plate, and the moment his fingers touched the metal, a voice spoke directly into his mind. "Put it back, or you're next." Jake jerked his hands away from the armor and spun around, looking for whoever had spoken. The voice had been clear and cold, like ice water running down his spine. But again there was no one there. "Who's there?" Jake shouted, his voice cracking with fear. "Show yourself!" The junkyard remained empty and silent. Jake stood there for a long moment, his heart hammering against his ribs. He had definitely heard the voice. It had been as clear as if someone had been standing right next to him, but that was impossible. His environmental suit had sensors that would have detected another person within 100 meters. He was alone out here, just like always. Jake looked back at the armor lying on the ground. In the dim light of the junkyard, it seemed to glow with its own inner light. The symbols along the edge looked different now, as if they were moving and shifting when he was not looking directly at them. He should walk away. Every instinct in his body was telling him to leave the armor where it was and get back to the safe areas of the junkyard. But Jake had not survived this long by being careful. He had survived by taking risks, by grabbing opportunities when they presented themselves, and this armor was definitely an opportunity. Even if he could not identify what it was, the quality of the metal alone would be worth a fortune. The symbols might be some kind of alien language, which would make it even more valuable to the right collector. Jake pulled out his salvage bag and carefully lifted the chest plate. It was heavier than he had expected, but not impossibly so. The metal felt warm now, as if it had been sitting in sunlight, though there was no sun in this part of the junkyard. As he placed the armor in his bag, Jake could have sworn he heard something like a sigh, as if the junkyard itself was disappointed in his choice. He looked around one more time, but everything was still and quiet. Jake made his way back through the piles of wreckage, moving faster now. He wanted to get the armor back to his quarters where he could examine it properly. The salvage bag felt heavier with each step, and not just because of the weight of the armor. It felt like he was carrying something important, something that would change everything. By the time he reached the transport tube that would take him back to the residential section of the station, Jake was exhausted. The armor had grown warm in his bag, and he could feel the heat through the fabric. It was probably just his imagination, but it almost felt like the thing was alive. As the transport tube carried him through the station, Jake stared out at the stars beyond the windows. For the first time in years, he felt like he was on the edge of something big. Maybe this piece of armor would be his ticket off this station, his chance to start over somewhere better. He had no idea that he was carrying something that would change not just his life, but the fate of every human being in the galaxy. The armor in his bag was more than just metal and technology. It was a weapon, a tool, and a responsibility that had been waiting for someone like him to find it. Jake Morrison had always been a survivor, someone who took what he needed and asked questions later. But now he was about to learn that sometimes the things you take have a way of taking you back. The transport tube slowed as it approached his stop. Jake shouldered his bag and prepared to step out into the corridor that led to his quarters. Behind him, the junkyard continued its slow orbit around the station, full of secrets and dangers that most people never saw. But Jake had seen something today that he would never forget. And whether he knew it or not, something had seen him too. Jake's quarters were small and cramped. Like everything else on Station Omega 7, the room had a bed, a desk, a small storage unit, and barely enough space to turn around. But it was his space, and right now it was the only place where he could examine his discovery without curious eyes watching him. He locked the door behind him and pulled the chest plate from his salvage bag. Under the bright lights of his room, the armor looked even more impressive. The black metal seemed to drink in the light, and the strange symbols along the edges appeared to move when he looked at them from different angles. Jake set the armor on his desk and pulled up his chair. He had a basic computer terminal that he used for work reports and personal messages. It was old and slow, but it had ports for connecting salvage technology. Maybe he could learn something about what this armor really was. The first thing Jake noticed was a small opening near the bottom of the chest plate. It looked like some kind of interface port, similar to the ones used by human technology but more advanced. The opening was perfectly circular and seemed to be made of a different material than the rest of the armor. Jake hesitated for a moment. Connecting unknown alien technology to his computer could be dangerous. It might contain viruses or other harmful programs. But his curiosity was stronger than his caution. He had come this far, and he needed to know what he had found. He pulled a connection cable from his desk drawer and carefully inserted one end into the port on the armor. The moment the cable made contact, the armor began to glow with a soft blue light. Jake quickly connected the other end to his computer terminal. The screen flickered and went black. For a moment, Jake thought he had broken his computer. Then suddenly, the screen exploded with information. Text scrolled past faster than he could read, mixed with images and symbols that made no sense to him. Jake tried to slow down the data flow, but his computer was not responding to his commands. The information kept coming, flooding his screen with what looked like technical specifications, star charts, and historical records. Some of it was in human languages, but most of it was in scripts he had never seen before. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the data flow stopped. The screen went dark for a moment, then displayed a single message in clear English. Access granted. Welcome, new operator. Beginning basic orientation, Jake stared at the screen in shock. The armor had recognized him somehow, and it was treating him like he was supposed to be using it. This was not just a piece of military equipment. This was something much more advanced. A new message appeared on the screen. You have discovered the personal armor of Commander Zara Voss, Terran Mercenary Corps. This unit has been inactive for 43 years, 7 months, and 12 days, beginning emergency. Protocols. Jake had never heard of the Terran Mercenary Corps. He knew about the various human military forces, but this was not one of them. He tried to search for more information, but his computer's database had no records of any organization with that name. More text appeared on the screen. Warning, hegemony forces have been detected in this sector. All human settlements are at risk. Armor-bearer must be prepared for immediate activation. Jake's blood ran cold. He had never heard of the hegemony either, but the way the armor's computer talked about them made it clear they were dangerous. The message continued, Final log of Commander Zara Voss. The hegemony has found our base. We held them off as long as we could, but there are too many of them. I am uploading all combat data and tactical information to the armor's memory banks. Whoever finds this equipment, you are humanity's last hope. The hegemony will not stop until every human world is destroyed or enslaved. The armor will choose its next bearer based on psychological compatibility and survival instincts. If you are reading this, you have been chosen. Do not let us down. Jake pushed back from his desk, his mind racing. This was insane. He was just a salvage worker, not a soldier. He had no training, no experience with military operations. How could he be anyone's last hope? But even as he tried to reject what he was reading, Jake could not ignore the evidence in front of him. The armor was real, and it was more advanced than anything he had ever seen. The information on his screen was too detailed and too consistent to be fake. As he watched, new data began to appear on his screen. Technical specifications for weapons he had never heard of, tactical information about alien species, and detailed maps of star systems across the galaxy. The armor was downloading its entire database into his computer. Jake realized that the armor was not just a piece of equipment. It was a repository of knowledge, a library of information that had been collected over decades of warfare. And now it was trying to teach him everything it knew. The chest plate on his desk began to glow brighter, and Jake could hear a soft humming sound coming from it. The temperature in his small room began to rise, and he could smell something like ozone in the air. Suddenly his computer screen changed again. This time it showed him a three-dimensional image of the complete armor set. The chest plate was just one piece. There were arm guards, leg plates, a helmet, and what looked like a power source that would fit on his back. Additional components detected in salvage yard location 7G Delta, the computer announced. Recommend immediate recovery before hegemony forces arrive. Jake's heart skipped a beat. There were more pieces of the armor scattered around the junkyard, and according to the computer, enemy forces were coming to get them. He had to make a choice. He could put the chest plate back where he found it and pretend none of this had happened, or he could commit to whatever path the armor was trying to lead him down. As he sat there trying to decide, Jake noticed something else happening. The symbols on the chest plate were glowing now, and they seemed to be responding to his presence. When he moved closer to the armor, the symbols glowed brighter. When he moved away, they dimmed. The armor was bonding with him somehow, learning his biorhythms and genetic markers. Jake could feel it in the back of his mind like a whisper that was slowly getting louder. The armor was not just offering him power and knowledge. It was offering him a purpose. Jake had spent his entire adult life just surviving, moving from job to job and never really belonging anywhere. He had always felt like he was meant for something more, but he had never known what that might be. Now, looking at the alien armor on his desk, he began to understand. The armor had not ended up in the junkyard by accident. It had been waiting for someone like him to find it. Someone who had nothing to lose and everything to gain. Someone who could make the hard choices that needed to be made. Jake reached out and touched the chest plate with his bare hand. The moment his skin made contact with the metal, the armor's glow intensified. Information flooded into his mind, not through his eyes but directly into his consciousness. He could see star charts, weapon specifications, and tactical data as clearly as if he had studied them for years, but more than that, he could feel the presence of everyone who had worn the armor before him. Dozens of men and women who had fought and died to protect humanity from threats that most people never knew existed. Their memories were stored in the armor's neural network, and now they were becoming part of him. Jake stood up slowly. Still, touching the armor, he knew what he had to do. The other pieces of the armor were still out there in the junkyard, and he had to find them before anyone else did. The hegemony forces that the armor had warned him about were coming, and he needed to be ready. He was no longer just Jake Morrison, salvage worker. He was the new bearer of humanity's greatest weapon, and he had work to do. Jake knew he had to move fast. The armor's computer had told him that the other pieces were scattered around the junkyard, and enemy forces were coming. He could not waste time thinking about what he was getting himself into. He had to act. He grabbed his salvage bag and headed for the door, but stopped when he heard footsteps in the corridor outside his room. Heavy boots were walking toward his door, and they did not sound like the soft shoes that most station workers wore. These sounded like military boots. Jake pressed his ear to the door and listened. The footsteps stopped right outside his room. Someone was standing there, waiting. Jake held his breath and tried not to make any noise. "Jake Morrison," a woman's voice called through the door. "This is Captain Lisa Stone from Station Security. I need to talk to you about your activities in the junkyard today." Jake's heart sank. Someone had been watching him. Maybe there were cameras in the restricted area that he had not noticed. Maybe his computer connection to the armor had triggered some kind of security alert. Either way, he was in trouble. "I'm coming," Jake called back, trying to keep his voice steady. He looked at the chest plate on his desk, still glowing softly. He could not let security take it away from him, not when he was so close to understanding what it really was. Without thinking, Jake reached out and pressed both hands against the armor. The moment his skin touched the metal, everything changed. The chest plate flowed over his torso like liquid metal, fitting perfectly to his body. Jake felt a surge of energy run through him, and suddenly he could see things he had never noticed before. He could hear Captain Stone's heartbeat through the door. He could smell the metal polish on her weapon. He could sense the two security guards standing behind her in the corridor. Jake's mind was flooded with information from the armor's computer. Tactical assessments, threat analysis, and combat strategies filled his consciousness. He was no longer just Jake Morrison, salvage worker. He was something more dangerous. The armor's neural interface connected with his brain, and Jake could feel the memories of previous wearers flowing into his mind. He saw battles on distant worlds, fights against alien enemies that looked like nightmares. He felt the determination and courage of soldiers who had died defending humanity from threats that most people never knew existed. "Morrison, open this door right now," Captain Stone demanded. "We know you found something in the restricted area. We just want to talk." Jake could hear the lie in her voice. The armor's enhanced senses let him detect the micro-changes in her speech patterns that indicated deception. She was not here to talk. She was here to take the armor away from him. But Jake also sensed something else. Fear. Captain Stone was afraid of something, and it was not him. Her heart rate was elevated, and her breathing was shallow. She was scared of something much bigger than a salvage worker who had found a piece of military equipment. Jake moved to his small window and looked out at the junkyard. What he saw made his blood freeze. 3 ships were approaching the station, but they were not human vessels. The armor's computer identified them immediately. Hegemony attack craft, designed for stealth and close combat. The enemy forces had arrived. Just as the armor had predicted, they were not here by coincidence. They had been tracking the armor's signal, waiting for someone to activate it. Jake's connection to the armor had told them exactly where to find it. "Captain Stone," Jake called through the door, "you need to evacuate the station. We're about to be attacked." There was silence from the corridor. Then Captain Stone's voice came, back, confused and angry. "What are you talking about, Morrison? Open this door immediately, or we'll break it down." Jake could hear the security guards moving into position. They were going to force their way into his room whether he cooperated or not. But Jake was no longer thinking like a civilian. The armor had given him access to military training and combat experience that he had never possessed before. He moved away from the door and positioned himself near the back wall of his room. The armor systems were analyzing the room's layout, calculating angles and distances. Jake could see tactical information overlaid on his vision, showing him the best defensive positions and escape routes. The door to his room exploded inward as the security guards used a breaching charge. Captain Stone entered first, her weapon drawn, followed by 2 guards in full tactical gear. They were expecting to find a scared salvage worker hiding in a corner. Instead, they found Jake standing calmly in the center of the room, wearing armor that seemed to bend light around it. The chest plate had extended protective covering over his arms and shoulders, and his eyes were glowing with the same blue light as the armor's systems. "Stay back," Jake warned them, his voice carrying harmonics that made the air itself vibrate. "You don't understand what's happening here." Captain Stone raised her weapon, but Jake was already moving. The armor enhanced his speed and reflexes beyond human limits. He crossed the room in a single bound, disarming Stone and her guards before they could react. He was careful not to hurt them, but he made it clear that he could have killed them, all if he had wanted to. "Listen to me," Jake said, holding Captain Stone's weapon. 3 enemy ships are approaching this station. They're here for this armor, and they'll kill everyone on board to get it. You need to sound the evacuation alarm right now." Captain Stone stared at him in shock. The man she had known as a quiet salvage worker was gone, replaced by something that moved like a trained killer. "What are you?" she whispered. "I'm someone who's trying to save your life," Jake replied. "Check your sensors. Look at the approaching ships. They're not human, and they're not here to talk." As if to prove his point, the station's emergency alarms began to wail. The attack had begun. Jake could feel the armor systems connecting to the station's network, analyzing the incoming threat. The hegemony ships were smaller than human vessels, but they were armed with weapons that could cut through the station's hull like paper. "We need to get to the command center," Jake said, handing Captain Stone's weapon back to her. "The armor's computer has tactical information that might help us defend the station." Captain Stone looked at her weapon, then at Jake, then at the alarms flashing on the walls. Her training told her to arrest Jake and secure the unknown technology, but her instincts told her that he was telling the truth about the attack. "How do I know you're not working with them?" she asked. Jake's enhanced hearing picked up the sound of energy weapons firing somewhere else on the station. The attack was not just coming from outside. Enemy forces had already boarded the station, probably using teleportation technology or stealth infiltration. "Because if I was working with them, you'd already be dead," Jake said simply. "The armor chose me too. Protect humanity, not to destroy it, but I can't do it alone. I need your help." Captain Stone made her decision. She activated her communicator and began issuing orders to her security teams. "All units, we have hostile forces on the station. This is not a drill. Civilian evacuation protocols are now in effect." Jake nodded his approval, but he was already thinking about the next step. The armor's computer was showing him the locations of the other pieces scattered around the junkyard. He needed to collect them before the hegemony forces did. An incomplete armor set would not be enough to stop what was coming. "I have to go back to the junkyard," Jake told Captain Stone. There are other pieces of this armor out there, and I need all of them if we're going to survive this. Captain Stone looked at him like he was crazy. You want to go outside while we're under attack? Jake smiled grimly. Captain, I'm not the one who should be worried about going outside. They should be worried about me. Jake moved through the corridors of Station Omega 7 like a ghost. The armor had made him faster and stronger than any normal human, but more importantly, it had given him knowledge. He knew where the enemy forces were before he saw them, and he knew how to fight them. The hegemony soldiers were not what Jake had expected. They were tall and thin, with gray skin and 4 arms. Each one carried weapons that fired beams of red energy, and they moved with the coordination of a hive mind. But they had made one mistake. They had come to the station expecting to find frightened humans who would surrender without a fight. The first group of aliens Jake encountered was in the main corridor leading to the Junkyard. There were 5 of them, and they were moving toward the residential areas where the civilian population lived. Jake could not let them reach the innocent people on the station. He attacked without warning, moving so fast that the aliens barely had time to react. The armor gave him strength beyond human limits, and his punches could dent metal. The first alien went down before it could raise its weapon. The second managed to fire a shot, but Jake was already moving, and the energy beam passed harmlessly through the space where he had been standing. The fight was over in less than 30 seconds. Jake stood among the fallen enemies, breathing heavily but unharmed. The armor had protected him from their weapons, and his enhanced reflexes had let him dodge the attacks he could not block, but Jake knew this was just the beginning. The armor's sensors were detecting dozens more enemy soldiers throughout the station. They were not just here to steal the armor. They were here to kill everyone on board. Jake reached the Junkyard access tunnel and found it blocked by a force field. The aliens had cut off the route to prevent anyone from escaping to the restricted areas. But the armor's computer had a solution. It began to analyze the force field, looking for weaknesses. Energy pattern recognized, the armor's voice said in Jake's mind. Hegemony containment field, generation 7. Weakness detected at harmonic frequency, 247.6 terahertz. Jake did not understand the technical details, but he did not need to. The armor guided his movements, and he placed his hands on the force field at exactly the right spots. Energy flowed from the armor into the barrier, and it collapsed with a shower of sparks. The Junkyard was in chaos. Hegemony forces had landed. 3 shuttles among the scrap piles, and they were systematically searching for something. Jake realized they were looking for the other pieces of the armor, just as he was. From his hiding place behind a pile of wrecked ship parts, Jake watched the aliens work. They had sophisticated scanning equipment, and they were moving through the Junkyard with military precision. But they were also making noise, and Jake could track their movements using the armor's enhanced hearing. The armor's computer was analyzing the enemy forces and their equipment. Information flowed through Jake's mind as the computer identified their weapons, their communication systems, and their tactical patterns. These were not random raiders. They were professional soldiers, and they had been hunting pieces of this armor for a very long time. Jake began to move through the Junkyard, staying in the shadows and avoiding the search teams. The armor's computer was guiding him toward the locations of the other pieces, and he could feel them calling to him. Each piece of the armor was designed to work with the others, and they were all connected through some kind of quantum field. The first piece Jake found was a gauntlet, buried under a pile of engine parts. The moment he touched it, the metal flowed over his hand like liquid, bonding with the chest plate he already wore. Immediately, Jake felt his connection to the armor's systems grow stronger. New information flooded his mind, including tactical data about the hegemony forces and their weaknesses. Jake learned that the hegemony was not just one species. It was a coalition of different alien races that had banded together to control the galaxy. They eliminated any species that showed signs of becoming too powerful or too independent. Humanity had been on their target list for over 200 years, but something had been protecting human space from their attacks. That something was the Terran mercenary corps. a secret military organization that had been fighting the hegemony for decades. The armor Jake wore had belonged to their best soldiers, warriors who had given their lives to buy humanity time to grow and spread among the stars. As Jake collected the second piece of armor, a leg guard, he began to understand the full scope of what was happening. The hegemony had not just come to steal the armor. They had come to finish what they had started years ago. They wanted to wipe out humanity once and for all, but they were too late. The armor was already bonding with a new bearer, and Jake was becoming something they had not expected. Each piece of the armor he collected made him stronger, faster, and more dangerous. More importantly, it gave him access to the memories and experiences of everyone who had worn it before him. Jake found the third piece, a shoulder guard, just as a hegemony search team spotted him. The aliens opened fire immediately, their red energy beams turning the scrap metal around him into molten slag. But Jake was no longer just dodging their attacks. He was learning from them. The armor's computer was analyzing every shot, every movement, every tactical decision the aliens made. It was building a profile of their combat capabilities and finding ways to counter them. Jake realized that the armor was not just protecting him. It was turning him into the perfect weapon against the hegemony forces. Jake charged the search team, moving faster than their eyes could follow. His armored fists crushed their weapons, and his enhanced strength sent them flying through the air. But he was careful not to kill them. Something in the armor's programming told him that prisoners might be useful. As the last alien fell unconscious, Jake heard a voice behind him. "Impressive," someone said in accented English. "But you're still not ready for what's coming." Jake spun around and saw a figure standing on top of a pile of wreckage. It was another human, but this one was wearing a different kind of armor. It was silver instead of black, and it seemed to shimmer with its own inner light. "Who are you?" Jake demanded, his hand moving to where a weapon should be. The figure jumped down from the pile, landing gracefully despite the heavy armor. "My name is Cole Bennett," the man said. "I'm what you might call a consultant. I've been watching your progress with great interest." Jake's armor computer was scanning the newcomer, but it could not identify his equipment. The silver armor was blocking all sensor readings, and Jake could not tell if this Cole Bennett was friend or enemy. "I'm here to make you an offer," Cole continued. "The hegemony is just the beginning. There are much bigger threats out there, and humanity is going to need all the help it can get. That armor you're wearing is powerful, but it's not enough by itself." Jake kept his distance, ready to fight if necessary. "What kind of offer?" Cole smiled, and Jake could see that his eyes were glowing with the same blue light as the armor systems. "I'm offering you the truth about what humanity really is and what we're capable of becoming. But first, you need to finish collecting. That armor, you're going to need every piece of it for what comes next." As if to emphasize his point, the station's hull shuddered as more hegemony ships arrived. The real battle was about to begin. Jake stared at Cole Bennett, trying to decide if this stranger was a friend or another enemy. The silver armor made it impossible to read his intentions, and Jake's enhanced senses could not penetrate whatever technology was protecting the man. "You said you have the truth about humanity," Jake said carefully. "What truth?" Cole walked closer, his silver armor moving without making any sound. "The truth is that we're not just another species, Jake. We're something special. Something that scares the hegemony more than they want to admit." Before Jake could respond, another explosion shook the station. More enemy ships had arrived, and they were bringing heavy weapons. Jake could feel the armor's computer calculating the odds of survival, and they were not good. "We don't have time for riddles," Jake said. "Either help me find the rest of this armor, or get out of my way." Cole smiled and pointed toward a section of the junkyard that Jake had not searched yet. "The helmet and boots are over there, buried under that pile of ship engines, but be careful. The hegemony has set up an ambush." Jake looked where Cole was, pointing, and saw movement among the wreckage. At least a dozen enemy soldiers were hiding there, waiting for him to come looking for the armor pieces. They had figured out what he was doing, and they were ready to stop him. "Why are you helping me?" Jake asked. Because I want to see what happens when a human gets access to the full armor set, Cole replied. It's been over 40 years since anyone wore the complete suit. I'm curious to see if the old stories are true. Jake did not have time to ask what stories Cole was talking about. The station was under heavy attack and people were dying. He needed those last 2 pieces of armor if he was going to have any chance of stopping the hegemony forces. Jake began moving toward the ambush site, but instead of trying to sneak up on the enemies, he did something they did not expect. He walked straight toward them, making no effort to hide. The hegemony soldiers opened fire the moment they saw him. Red energy beams filled the air, turning the metal around Jake into glowing slag. Jake kept walking. The armor absorbed most of the damage, and what got through only made him angry. When Jake reached the enemy position, he moved like a force of nature. The armor had given him strength beyond human limits, and his fists could punch through alien weapons like they were made of paper. He moved from soldier to soldier, disabling their equipment and knocking them unconscious. In less than 2 minutes, the ambush was over. Jake stood among the fallen enemies, breathing hard but uninjured. The armor had protected him from everything they could throw at him. Jake found the helmet buried under a pile of engine parts. The moment he put it on, his vision exploded with new information. He could see energy patterns, detect hidden enemies, and analyze the tactical situation across the entire station. The helmet connected to all the other pieces of armor, creating a network of sensors and computers that turned Jake into a living weapon. The boots were easier to find. They were lying next to the helmet as if someone had carefully placed them. There, when Jake put them on, he felt the armor's power systems come fully online. Energy flowed through the suit like electricity, and Jake realized that he was now wearing something that could challenge entire armies. Cole Bennett was watching from a safe distance, and Jake could see approval in his posture. How do you feel? Cole called out. Jake took a moment to assess his condition. The armor felt like a second skin now, responding to his thoughts before he was even aware of them. Information flowed through his mind in a constant stream, showing him the positions of every enemy on the station, the status of the defensive systems, and the approach vectors of the incoming ships. I feel like I could take on the world, Jake replied honestly. Good, Cole said, because that's exactly what you're going to have to do. Jake's enhanced vision showed him something that made his blood run cold. The hegemony fleet had grown to over 50 ships, and they were not just attacking Station Omega 7, they were attacking human colonies across this entire sector of space. The assault on the station was just the beginning of a much larger operation. They're trying to wipe us out, Jake said, the terrible truth sinking in. This isn't just about the armor. They're starting a war of extermination, Cole nodded grimly. The hegemony has decided that humanity has become too dangerous to ignore. We've spread too far, grown too strong, learned too much. They want to eliminate us before we become a real threat to their empire. Jake felt anger building inside him, but it was not just his anger. The armor carried the memories and emotions of everyone who had worn it before him, and they were all furious at the injustice of it. Humanity had never asked for this war. They had just wanted to explore the galaxy and build new homes among the stars. What can one person do against an entire fleet? Jake asked. Cole's smile was predatory. You're about to find out. Jake accessed the armor's tactical systems and began planning his attack. The suit had weapons that he had not used, yet systems that were still coming online as the armor completed its bonding process. He could feel new capabilities awakening in his mind, abilities that no normal human should possess. Jake launched himself into space using the armor's built-in propulsion system. Moving between the enemy ships like a living missile, he began to systematically disable their weapons and engines. The hegemony forces tried to stop him, but their weapons were designed to fight ships. Not a single armored figure moving at impossible speeds. Within an hour, Jake had crippled half the enemy fleet. The remaining ships tried to retreat, but Jake was faster than their engines. He pursued them through space, disabling ship after ship until only a few managed to escape into hyperspace. When Jake returned to Station Omega 7, He found Cole waiting for him in the docking bay. The man in the silver armor was no longer alone. He was accompanied by a dozen other humans, all wearing different versions of advanced armor. "Welcome to the real Terran mercenary corps," Cole said. "We've been waiting for someone like you for a very long time." Jake looked at the assembled warriors and felt a sense of belonging that he had never experienced before. These were people. Like him, humans who had been chosen by ancient armor to protect their species from threats that most people never knew existed. What happens now? Jake asked. Cole gestured toward the damaged station, where repair crews were already working to fix the damage from the attack. Now we prepare for war. The hegemony will be back and they'll bring more ships next time. But they've made one crucial mistake. What mistake? They've given us a reason to unite, Cole replied. For too long, humanity has been scattered across the galaxy, each colony fighting its own battles. But this attack changes everything. Now we have a common enemy and we have the tools to fight back. Jake looked out at the stars beyond the station, knowing that somewhere out there, the enemy was regrouping and planning their next attack. But he also knew that humanity would be ready for them. The armor had chosen him, and through him, it had chosen his entire species. The secret war was over. The real war was about to begin. And for the first time in galactic history, the hegemony was going to face an enemy that could fight back on equal terms. Jake Morrison had started the day as a simple salvage worker. He was ending it as humanity's newest guardian, armed with technology that could reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Humanity would not go quietly into extinction. They would fight, and they would win.